Well, hello everybody. I'm John Quinton. I'm Professor of Soil Science at the Lancaster Environment Centre at Lancaster University in the UK. And this morning, as part of this short course on soil carbon monitoring, I'm going to be giving a kind of an overview talk, thinking about some of the global perspectives on soil change. What I'm going to cover in the talk this morning is we'll go over some of the soil functions that I'm sure that many of you will be familiar with, and then we'll focus in a little bit on food production, and then we'll kind of wrap up by taking a wider perspective and think about soil lifespans and how we might extend them. So let's just recap the soil functions. We all know about plant production, but there are some other important functions that soils perform, particularly providing a habitat for the soil organisms that help to cycle nutrients and make them available for plants. Soils also filter and buffer nutrients, helping to promote good water quality and helping to again produce nitrogen and phosphorus that help plants grow. They obviously store a lot of the water. Most of the rain that falls on the terrestrial surface of the planet is stored in soils, and they regulate the flow of that water to rivers, and so are really important for in both the regulation of droughts, but also in times of flood as well. They store most of the terrestrial carbon, and by that means they also help to regulate our climate. They're also what we often build buildings out of, and we build buildings on top of. So they're an engineering medium as well. And much of our cultural heritage is held within the soil. So many archaeological artifacts, our own ancestry is often preserved within the soil. So they have a cultural resonance with us too. Soils, via these functions, are linked very closely with the delivery of the Sustainable Development Goals, and you'll see this nice diagram taken from a paper that I was one of the authors on, which shows how soils are really central to the delivery of those goals through their impacts on both ecosystem services, but also on some of these other topics which are really important for their delivery, such as hydrology, ecology, and agronomy. And so we see soils really as this great integrator of these different topic areas that allow us to deliver on some of the Sustainable Development Goals. And the one I'm really interested in thinking about today is around food production, and so the link then very much into SDG 2, the zero hunger goal. So if we think about soils and food production, no matter where you are in the world, whether you're in Brazil producing some coffee, whether you're in China producing a crop of maize, in Spain producing some lemons, in the UK growing maize to feed animals, or in Kenya producing some fantastic tea near Kericho, soils are absolutely vital to food production, and without soil there is not going to be any food for us to eat. So it's really important that we protect our foods, our soil, that provide us with food. So if we look at at food production around the world. And I've just taken this from the UN FAO statistics, and the group Our World in Data do some nice graphics where they reproduce some of these statistics in a very easily digestible format, and I've borrowed one of those from their website. But if we look at maize production over the last 60 years around the world, we see some interesting trends. And in the US, we see maize starting from a relatively high base and the production continuing to grow. Now, obviously, this is a mix of an increased land area, but also it's around varieties, it's around fertilizer, and it's around water. And we've seen similar patterns in both South America and in Europe. South America coming from a lower base, but catching and now overtaking Europe in its maize production. But where we see perhaps less of a growth is in the countries of Africa. And I've just picked out East Africa, West Africa, Southern Africa, and I put Kenya in there as well. You'll see the maize production in the UK is at a pretty low, as was almost nothing, and is grown from a pretty low base. We're not big maize growers because of our kind of us being in the north where it's cool and damp. So it's not great maize growing country. But what we do see here is that the African nations have been somewhat left behind, particularly, if you think about South America, was growing a bit more maize, but perhaps not so much, but has really taken off in recent years and has many similar soils than you might find in Africa as well. So why is that? Are the soils different? Well, I'm not sure they're so different to what we find in South America. I think there's probably certainly one major reason, which is the lack of nutrient replacement, and we'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. And then we might also want to question whether soils are degrading more in Africa as well. So if we think about soil threats, you might want to just take a minute just to have a little look at these pictures here and just see if you can identify some of the soil threats from the pictures here. So maybe just pause this video, or while I'm talking about not much at all, you could have a think about what some of these threats are. So let's just have a quick reprise of them. Quite an obvious picture here. We've got a nasty gully system developing in Swaziland in southern Africa, which is going to encroach on this maize production here. So erosion is one of the threats. You might spot the white color here of salinization in southern Spain. You might also pick out, this is a large piece of agricultural machinery which is pulling soil down a hill slope. So it's actually tillage that's eroding the soil and thinning the soil. So that can be a threat. And tillage can also be linked to soil compaction. And here you can see that kind of platy structure where the soil has been crushed under farm machinery, causing soil compaction in the top horizons, which is going to prevent roots from penetrating and prevent water from penetrating as well. We then have here a picture of some soil carbon, this time in the north of the UK and some of our peatlands, which are losing carbon, both due to land management pressures and also potentially due to climate change. We have soil contamination. This is the fallout zone from the Fukushima eruption in Japan. Here, contamination from radioactivity, but it could equally be from pollution. We have soil surfaces being sealed over at a dramatic rate as we see urbanization across the world. with the sealing of soils, many of them prime agricultural soils. And then the final one here is I've picked as some pictures of harvest here in China, but it could be anywhere in the world where we're taking away nutrients in our harvested crops, which we're not always replacing. So let's have a little think about that in a bit more detail now, because I think it's particularly relevant to soils across Africa. So this is also taken from World Bank data, replotted by our World and Data. So that's the base map, which shows base graph, which shows the fertilizer additions. And you can see around the world that fertilizer additions have tended to grow apart from in sub-Saharan Africa. And I've just plotted on there the N requirements for maize in sub-Saharan Africa. So there's a nice paper out from Ten Berg and colleagues in Global Food Security, which looks at the nutritional input required for maize production in sub-Saharan Africa. And they reckon it's somewhere between, let's say, about 120, 130 kilograms to 160 kilograms of N per year. And if you look at where N requirements are at the moment, or N additions are in the firms of fertilizer at the moment in Kenya, you're probably looking at around 20, possibly 30. So a real problem, because we're just basically mining that nitrogen and probably also phosphorus and potassium from the soils in Africa, and we're not replacing it. And there's only one way that yields are going to do, and that, they are either going to flatline or they're going to decline over time. And there's a real need to address this. It's also worth pointing out that there are issues with over application as well, and China has some real major pollution problems caused by over application of nitrogen, and we have some of the similar problems in Northern Europe as well, where we're adding too much in the way of nitrogen and phosphorus out of a bag, and that then ends up in our watercourses, causing eutrophication issues. Some of the other issues facing soils in Africa and around the world are degradation due to erosion. And I just picked out two pictures from recent visits to Kenya, more in grazing lands here than in maize production areas. But issues around the loss of vegetation cover. And when you lose vegetation cover, you generate erosion. And when you generate erosion, you're then in a kind of a spiraling down of productivity. And we did some work a little while ago, looking at how much nitrogen and phosphorus were being lost with erosion, and also how much was being replaced. So we've got this additional problem in that because we've got soils which are not producing much vegetation cover, they're prone to erosion, they're losing more phosphorus and they're losing more nitrogen. These are the two bars here, and the additions of both phosphorus and nitrogen isn't replacing the amount of material that's being lost by erosion across the continent of Africa. And so you've not only got the nutrient mining, but you've got losses due to erosion, and if you combine them, you're in an even greater deficit than you might be with just one of those processes active. I just want to make the point that it's not just Africa, and this was an article I saw in the UK Times on May the 6th, just a couple of weeks ago, where a conversion to organic agriculture, which is often seen as a panacea, was turning South Dakota into a dust bowl. And this is largely because it returns to a plough-based system where you're turning the soil, and that's releasing organic carbon and breaking the soil structure up, making it weaker. And there's a loss of material by wind and water erosion. And the pictures on the right are taken by one of our US PhD students from her back window of her parents' house, looking out across the landscape in April this year. And you can see on 2 different days, one when the wind's blowing and one when the wind isn't blowing. And they grow a lot of potatoes in this area. And again, heavy tillage, producing a lot of dust when the wind is blowing. So it's not just an African problem, and I think that leads us on quite nicely onto thinking about soil lifespans, because if you think about soil, it's not very renewable. Okay, it forms really, really slowly, and measurements we've made in the UK, we're getting down to 0.05, 0.06 millimeters per year. Maybe it's a bit faster in Kenya. We don't really know because of the warmer temperatures and moist, warm climate. But it's essentially non-renewable. And so what we thought would be interesting would be to take all the data that we could lay our hands on from around the world. And it was something like, well, the numbers up there, over 4,000 individual studies. It works out, I think, at about 12,000 plot years of data from around the world. And we considered what the lifespan might be. So we made a few assumptions. We took the erosion rates and we assumed a topsoil depth of about 30 centimeters. And we worked out how long that topsoil would last. It's been replotted here by Our World in Data. You can see I use this website a lot. They have some great graphics which are really nice to use. And they took the data from our paper and did a nice graphic of it. But you can see that when we plot that data and we look at the lifespan of our soils, or the lifespan of that top 30 centimeters, that around about 34% of them, if they're left bare, had lifespans less than 100 years. Under conventional agriculture, that's around 16%, and under conservation agriculture, around about 7%. So you can see the impact there of doing something. So one is having some plant growth, so that's conventionally managed soils instead of bare soils. And the next one is to move to some kind of conservation agriculture. And we'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. It's also worth mentioning that some soils were actually thickening. So where we had conservation practices in place, 21% of the soils were actually gaining soil. Under conventional agriculture, much lower, 7%, and only 3% of the bare soils. So there is a bit of a positive story here, and I want us to think that we, there are actions that we can take that will make a difference, and particularly, I think the thing is to be thinking about moving to some form of conservation agriculture, and by looking at different measures, you can see that all of these different measures tend to have much larger lifespans than when we go to either bare soil or the conventional systems. So the conventional systems is usually a plough-based agriculture. And I think what we're suggesting is we need to be trying to move away from disturbing the soil and breaking up the aggregates, and to a system which maintains vegetation cover for as much of the year as possible. And we can see here that in some of those systems as well, we're gaining soil, and of course that's the best possible scenario to be in. So just to wrap up, I think we all know that soil is vital to our future existence on the planet. It's key to delivering many of those sustainable development goals. Soils are under a threat, and we need to be advocates for them. So I hope you'll all go out and campaign to protect our soils. And I think in Africa we have particular challenges, and that's not only due to the other threats, erosion and such like, but there's a particular challenge, I think, around nutrient mining. So thinking about integrated systems which manage nutrients better, and that's not only just by adding fertilizer, but by mixing perhaps together crops, looking for using N fixation more effectively, new varieties that use less N and P or can access it more effectively, are all part of the solution there. So there's a lot of opportunities, I think, for positive change that can make a difference. So I think for you guys watching this video, I think it's around thinking about new conservation practices which integrate some of our learning from the past and think about how it may be applicable in the future. And critical to that will be how we manage nutrients and supply them to our crops in situations which have had a nutrient deficit for many, many years. And we want to understand how we're moving forward. And so understanding both soils and how they change will be a critical part of that. So just to wind up, you are all undertaking your studies at an exciting time, and you can influence the debate, and we can make a change. And I would encourage you to grasp some of these topics and to take them forward into the future.